Thank you, Mr. President. I rise tonight, as so many of my colleagues have through this long day, to urge all of us to join together to prevent a government shutdown. We've all expressed a growing amount of frustration here with what I would characterize as politics as usual under the dome of this great capital in which we're so fortunate to serve. But it sure seems like these are the kind of politics where the goalposts get continually moved and no amount of civility can seemingly overcome the impasse that is unfolding down the corridors in the House of Representatives. Now, I know the presiding officer operates in this way, and the American public operates in this way, and they expect us to work together. They expect us to pass an appropriations bill that funds our government. But it appears like some unrelated policy riders that aren't about appropriating money but are about setting policy, that they're leading to an impasse that could lead to an unnecessary and costly shutdown of government operations and services. Last night, I don't know where the presiding officer was, but my colleague, Senator Bennett, was down here, and he highlighted how petty this situation's become. He pointed out that if you and I went to Applebee's for dinner tonight, and we had a $20 dinner for two, and then we had a fight over the bill, we'd be fighting over 4 cents. Well, I have some news. It looks like today we've got an agreement. We reached on the actual numbers. But now the House wants to add some controversial policy riders into the mix. It's as if that same check arrived when we were at Applebee's, and after having finally agreed on who's going to pay the 4 cents, we're now arguing over whether the waitress, who's a hardworking American, should receive health care. I got to say, I think people are watching this, they're scratching their heads. I sure am. And we all face an impending government shutdown. And as I've said, some members seem to want to inject very controversial policy issues into the debate. These issues have divided us for too many years. We ought to have that debate elsewhere, though. And it's really forcing this shutdown on the American people. I got to tell you that some people who are standing their ground deficits. Now, I'm often the one that's highlighting how disturbing our long-range fiscal picture has become. But what's equally frustrating is the disservice that's being done to the American public by this current debate that we're in. Not only will we be taken off the beat from addressing our real fiscal imbalances, which would be the budget debate we need to have on the 2012 budget, or on the longer-term challenge that the Simpson-Bowles Commission pointed out, but we're now being asked to litigate women's health issues. We ought to be focusing on supporting economic development and job growth. I don't understand it. We have a tentative agreement to cut billions from current spending levels, but the Speaker of the House seems to continue to demand that we ought to focus on non-budget issues. These are hot-button issues. Why would we insert them into an unrelated budget debate when there's so much at stake? It's beyond me. I understand we want to show the American people we're serious about deficit reduction. I am. I know you are. I know the American people are. But in Colorado, people see straight through this latest ploy to inject non-budgetary issues into the debate. It's politics as usual. Mr. President, I know we've felt a little better recently. We've had 13 straight months of private sector growth. We've added 1.8 million jobs during that time frame. But our economy is still really fragile. And way too many Americans, way too many West Virginians, way too many Coloradans are struggling. And I have no doubt that a government shutdown at this time would have a counterproductive effect on our recovery. You don't just have to take my word for it. I'm a senator from Colorado. But listen to what top business leaders of all political persuasions are saying. The Business Roundtable president, John Engler, former governor of Michigan, Republican governor, said businesses would face the dangerous unintended consequences where interest rates could rise because of a shutdown and you'd have turmoil in our financial markets. Forecasters at Goldman Sachs have warned that a shutdown could shave off growth in our GDP every single week. CEOs of all stripes, all over the country have warned about the shutdown's impact on confidence in the U.S. economic recovery. The presiding officer and I know, and senators from all across the country, that confidence is what we need. That's what's really lacking in many respects. And a shutdown would actually prevent the growth we tangibly need to address our long-term growth and fiscal balance. In other words, if we get the economy growing again, we'd have more tax revenues, and we'd see that gap between what we're spending and bringing in narrow. And I can't help but think, in the context of this debate about my uncle, Stuart Udall, I know I've talked to the presiding officer about the important role his father and men like his father played in his upbringing and his values and his public service commitment. But Stuart Udall, my uncle, father of my cousin, Senator Tom Udall from New Mexico, he wrote a book called The Forgotten Founders that focused on the settling of the West. And I bet it would apply as well to West Virginia. The theme of the book was on how the West was settled, how it was built. And he made a strong case in his book that the people that came out west were not looking to get into gunfights or range wars, regardless of what the Hollywood movies would suggest. They were wanting to start a new life in a new country, pursue what we now call the American dream. My Uncle Stuart pointed out, when you watch those Hollywood movies, it was the people standing on the board sidewalks watching the mythical gunfight that were really the people who built the West. They were looking to work together. They weren't looking to get into fights. They were looking out for each other. Didn't matter what your political party was. And it feels to me like the American people today are standing on those board sidewalks, watching the same senseless gunfights and range wars, or our equivalent of them, right now here in Washington, D.C. But these are the people that matter. These are the people that will ultimately be hurt and affected by a shutdown. Now, I know I was hired by the people in Colorado and sent to the United States Senate. I was hired to come here and work together and solve some very difficult challenges facing this country. And that's why today I introduced the Preventing a Government Shutdown Act of 2011. Now, this bill was originally a Republican idea, and it's meant to ensure that the American people are not unfairly subjected to the effects of a government shutdown, simply because some members of Congress want to make a political point and pursue a persistent squabbling over the budget. The bill would ensure that federal appropriations continue at last year's funding levels as a bridge to keep the government running until a compromise could be reached for the remainder of a fiscal year. And then once Congress is able to reach a bipartisan agreement to fund the government for that fiscal year, then the automatic funding under my proposal would stop and it would be replaced by the enacted bill. Now, I know there are some who'd say, well, wait a minute, the Congress is charged with passing appropriations bills that reflect strategic planning, current functional needs, and create stability. What I'm suggesting that Preventing a Government Shutdown Act would do, it would create a safety valve that would ensure that partisan shutdown politics don't punish the American people and destabilize our economy going forward. Seems like a vocal minority wants to be combative, almost for the sake of being combative. Let's just fight for the sake of fighting. But in this case, in these delicate and fragile economic times, boy, that's not a helpful thing to do, to put it mildly. So I think the mature thing to do would be to have a piece of legislation in place that would eliminate that kind of irresponsible behavior moving forward. Now, Mr. President, as I come to close, I just have to think the American people are amazed at this, if they have time, because they're busy providing for their families. And we've got to settle down here. We've got to act like adults. We need to work collaboratively toward a real budget solution. Yeah, we've got to reduce our debt and deficits. Presiding officer's been on the point as well in this. But find anybody more committed than me to that cause. But let's reach it in a way that protects our senior citizens, our veterans, our students, our border security. I could go on with a long, long list of important functions the federal government provides. But let's do it in a way that slashes spending but doesn't harm our fragile economic recovery or divert our attention onto divisive social issues. We can't afford a government shutdown. We just can't flat out afford a government shutdown. I will be disappointed, to say the least, if the bipartisan deal that's before us, it's in our hands, is undercut by contentious, unrelated issues that only serve to divide us rather than bring us together. I know one thing we can agree on is that our military personnel deserve better than this. We have young people fighting in 2 wars. As I speak, we have young men and women serving all over the globe in over 50 countries. You and I know that. We serve on the Armed Services Committee. And the last thing our soldiers, our sailors, our airmen, our Marines need is to worry about whether they're going to be able to pay their bills. Military families have already done more than their share, and now we're asking them to do even more. And that's simply unacceptable, Mr. President. So I know we can find a solution to this particular situation. We worked together in the Senate with Senator Hutchison and a bipartisan group of senators to introduce the Bipartisan Ensuring Pay for Our Military Act. This bill, Senate Bill 724, would ensure that our military service members would not have interrupted pay in the event of a shutdown, and we need to pass that bill if we don't get the job done tonight. 3 days ago, I wrote a letter and I was joined by close to 18 of my colleagues, including the presiding officer, to Mr. Boehner. I know Speaker Boehner well. He and I served in the House together. And I urged him to work with all of us to avoid a shutdown. I'll stay here all the rest of this day, all night, whatever it takes. So I'm here to urge all of us, both chambers. Let's sit down together. Let's reason together. Let's use common sense together. Let's find a compromise. That's the American way.